The strange case of the lost Americans of the Rio Grande Valley starts back in the early 1900s. There is a historical marker on Military Highway 281, about 5 miles east of Mercedes, Texas, that documents the story. It involves corporate malfeasance, ineptness of the governments of two countries, and state and county bungling as well. Even today, residents and leaders speak of being ignored by the powers that be in the state and national capitals, both Mexican and American respectively. So it was back then, so perhaps things change slowly, be that as it may. This is the story of the lost Americans of Rio Rico. As some of you may know, the Rio Grande Valley is actually the Rio Grande Delta. Prior to dams and levees and flood controls starting at the beginning of the last century, for thousands of years the Rio Grande River would overflow its bed with floodwaters drawn from its birthplace in the snows of Colorado, and from the winter and spring storms, and also the hurricanes from the Gulf and from the Pacific, spending themselves over its watershed. Hundreds of thousands of acres would flood, leaving the rich silt collected in its long journey. There was no gold in this dirt, but the dirt itself was like gold. Only two things were needed: a reliable source of water and transportation to a market. Both came to the valley at about the same time. In 1904, the railroad reached the valley. Irrigation companies were formed to tap the water source of the Rio Grande. Fortunes were made in the land and water rights. Some developers were less than scrupulous in the way they did business. To ensure that the Rio Grande River would provide a reliable flow to their pumping station, the irrigation company at that time decided to take action to straighten out a little bend in the river and assure them always easy access to the water. The cover of the South Texas night and some dynamite were all that was necessary to do the deed. When the farmers of Rio Rico went to water their livestock the next morning, the river was gone. At least 416 acres of American soil had shifted south of the Rio Grande, or, more accurately, the Rio Grande had shifted north of them. This happened in 1906. The dynamite blast, a legal and international can of worms, had been opened that wouldn't be resolved for many years. Gradually, the area became more and more Mexican. By the 1920s, during Prohibition, Rio Rico became a successful resort. There was a 2-lane suspension bridge crossing into Rio Rico, and the town offered a lot in the way of entertainment. Bordellos, dog tracks, gambling, and of course, lots of booze. Al Capone was rumored to have visited there, and perhaps he did. His presence in the valley is well documented. The surviving lost Americans and descendants became official Americans again eventually. Final resolution of the border imbroglio between the two governments did not conclude officially until 1978. The following Texas historical marker tells the rest of the tale.
The Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican War, 1846 through 1848, designated the main channel of the Rio Grande as the Mexico-U.S. boundary. Disputes arising from frequent changes in the river's course led to the Treaty of 1884, which recognized only those river diversions resulting from natural occurrences. The International Boundary Commission was established in 1889 to administer the Treaty of 1884. In 1906, the American Rio Grande Land and Irrigation Company dug an unauthorized canal about 2 miles south of here, which altered the natural course of the Rio Grande. As a result, a 419-acre section of U.S. property, called El Horcon Tract, was isolated south of the river. Although still U.S. territory, according to the Treaty of 1884, the tract and the popular gambling and resort community of Rio Rico, which flourished there during the 1920s and 1930s, became increasingly subject to Mexican administration and jurisdiction. After the U.S. granted Mexico territorial rights over El Horcon Tract and Rio Rico in 1970, a native of Rio Rico sued the U.S. government to guarantee his U.S. citizenship. This lawsuit began an 8-year legal battle that eventually led to U.S. citizenship for about 200 people born in Rio Rico prior to 1970.